On the day I donated my kidney, I never thought my wife, Rebecca Tanner, would cut open her own heart and confess her regrets. 5 years earlier, she had staged her own death in a bombing. The explosion that shattered my world had been nothing more than an elaborate performance, carefully planned so she and Mason Sanders could test the depth of my loyalty. All she left behind was a mountain of ruin. $2 billion in gambling debt. A bloodstained contract that sold me into slavery. The creditors gave me only one choice. If you want us to leave her body in peace instead of feeding it to the hyenas, one of them had said with a smile, sign here. I signed the contract with my own blood. From that moment on, I was no longer a man. I became their pet. They locked me inside a rusted iron cage beneath an underground fighting arena where daylight never reached. Every morning they chained me like an animal, forcing me to kneel before victorious fighters and lick the blood from their boots while wealthy spectators laughed from above. At night, they filled my veins with drugs before throwing me into the arena. I wasn't a fighter. I was entertainment. Every broken rib doubled the betting pool. Every shattered tooth was worth another $10,000. The cheers of the crowd still echoed in my nightmares. 5 years passed that way. Then one day, I heard the news that finally destroyed whatever remained of me. My parents had been stripped naked and thrown alive into the mouth of a volcano. My mind snapped. Covered in blood and barely able to stand, I tore apart the iron chain that had restrained me for years and staggered toward the volcano, driven by grief alone. But what awaited me there wasn't my parents. It was Rebecca, very much alive. She stood beside Mason Sanders as if nothing had ever happened, gently lighting his cigarette. The orange flame reflected in her calm eyes while Mason took a long drag before blowing a lazy ring of smoke into the air. He glanced at his watch and smirked. We still had 10 seconds left on the bet, Rebecca. He laughed. You lost. Everything around me froze. The sky, the wind, even my heartbeat. Rebecca, the woman who was supposed to have died in that explosion 5 years ago. She looked at me with unmistakable disappointment. You couldn't even wait another 10 seconds, Ethan? Her lips curled into a mocking smile. Is your love really this cheap? Thanks to Mason, I finally got to see what kind of man you truly are. A loud ringing filled my ears. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. My throat tightened as the words barely escaped. What bet? Rebecca answered as casually as if we were discussing tomorrow's weather. A loyalty test. The bombing 5 years ago was fake. I only wanted to see whether you'd remain faithful after I was gone. Before she could continue, several bodyguards approached carrying 2 stretchers covered with white sheets. A cold feeling spread through my chest. No, my trembling hands struggled to lift the fabric. When the sheets finally slipped away, the world disappeared beneath my feet. My parents lay there, burned, torn apart. Their bodies were so badly charred that I almost failed to recognize them. My knees slammed into the ground. No tears came. The grief was simply too enormous. Mason shrank behind Rebecca, pretending to look frightened. I was only trying to have some fun, he muttered softly. I released the wolves as part of the game. I never expected them to attack Ethan's parents. He sighed dramatically. When I saw them begging for mercy, I couldn't bear to watch anymore. So, I helped end their suffering. A cruel smile appeared on his face. Who would have thought they'd look so ugly after dying? Rage exploded inside me. I lunged toward him with a roar. Before I could touch him, several bodyguards slammed heavy boots into my stomach and chest. I crashed back onto the rocky ground, coughing blood. Rebecca immediately covered Mason's eyes as though he were the victim. She glanced coldly at my parents' bodies. How disgusting. Her voice carried no emotion. Get rid of them. Later, their luxury car drove through the gates of the city's wealthiest neighborhood. The owner of the underground fighting ring, the same man who had forced me to lick blood from shoes for 5 endless years, bowed respectfully before Rebecca. Don't worry, Miss Rebecca. He smiled proudly. Those 2 old corpses have already been thrown into the volcano. Nothing remains, not even ashes. No one will ever trace this back to Mr. Mason. My heart stopped. I spun toward the gate, desperate to reach the volcano. Maybe there was still something left. A bone. A handful of ash. Anything. Rebecca grabbed my wrist before I could run. They're already gone. She frowned impatiently. What exactly are you trying to do now? Are you trying to make Mason uncomfortable on purpose? The warmth drained from every drop of blood inside my body. I stared at the woman I'd once loved more than my own life. Her face was familiar. But the person standing before me was a complete stranger. My voice shook. Was everything these past 5 years you're doing? She remained silent. I forced myself to continue. Did you kill my parents too? Rebecca casually shoved me backward before pulling a wet wipe from her purse. She slowly cleaned each finger, as though touching me had dirted her hands. It was only a bet. Her tone was icy. If you couldn't handle losing, you shouldn't have played. She folded the wipe neatly. If Mason hadn't taken pity on you, you wouldn't even deserve to stand here. For a long moment, I simply stared at her. Then I laughed. Quietly at first. Soon the laughter grew louder until my entire body trembled uncontrollably. Mason blinked in confusion. Has he gone crazy from happiness? Happiness? Was I supposed to be grateful? Grateful that I had inherited $2 billion of debt because of Rebecca's fake death? Grateful that I had sold myself into slavery like a dog? Grateful that I had survived 7 broken ribs, for missing teeth, countless beatings, and endless humiliation just to repay a debt that never should have existed? Or grateful that my parents had been ripped apart by wolves before being thrown into a volcano, while I was expected to thank the people responsible? A stabbing pain erupted inside my chest. Blood surged into my throat. I collapsed to my knees and coughed a crimson mouthful onto the polished marble floor. Mason recoiled several steps in fear. Rebecca instinctively pulled him into her arms before glaring at me with disgust. Ethan. Her voice was cold enough to freeze the air. You're still as pathetic as ever. She ordered the bodyguards to drag me to the riverside and wash the blood from my body, as though my suffering were nothing more than an inconvenience. As icy water soaked my clothes, I thought about the medical report folded inside my pocket. 1 month. That was all the time I had left. I had dreamed of one final journey. After earning my freedom, I would take my parents back to our hometown. Then I would scatter Rebecca's ashes somewhere peaceful, believing the woman I loved deserved to rest beneath a beautiful sky. Now, there were no parents left to bring home, no ashes to scatter, no future waiting for me, only silence. I reached into my soaked pocket and pulled out a wrinkled business card that had become damp from the river water. After staring at it for several seconds, I dialed the number. The call connected almost immediately. Does your son still need a kidney? My voice was calm. You can have mine. The man on the other end gasped in disbelief. I'll give you anything, he blurted out. Money, power, status, whatever you ask. Just save my son. For the first time that day, a faint smile appeared on my face. Then make sure Mason Sanders spends the rest of his life burning in hell. Before the man on the other end could reply, I ended the call. The kidney transplant was scheduled for 3 days later. Over the past 5 years, I had secretly saved every spare dollar I could from the underground fighting ring. It wasn't much after everything they'd taken from me, but it was enough for one thing. I bought my parents a quiet plot in the cemetery. Even if there were no bodies left to bury, I wanted to build a memorial for them. They deserved a place where someone could remember them. And when my own time came, I wanted my grave beside theirs. At least then, our family could be together again. Holding the purchase documents tightly against my chest, I walked toward the cemetery entrance. I never made it inside. Someone slammed into me from behind, knocking me violently to the ground. Before I could react, a sharp pain exploded through my chest as Rebecca's high heel drove into my ribs. Where's the money? Her cold voice rang above me. What did you spend it on? She kicked me again, without the slightest hesitation. Do you have any idea how humiliated Mason was in front of his friends today? Blood rose into my throat. I swallowed it back silently. My heart grew colder with every passing second. The money I had earned by risking my life in that underground arena, the money I had paid for with broken bones, shattered teeth, and endless humiliation. She treated it as though it belonged to her. Then she casually handed it over to Mason, so he could indulge himself. Back when she was still pretending to love me, she claimed we were dirt poor. I skipped meals, worked until my hands bled, saved every spare coin just to surprise her with a small necklace or a pair of earrings. Meanwhile, the only gift she had ever given me was a cheap $2 keychain. Now, I finally understood. She had never been poor. She had only been pretending. Mason stepped forward with a dark expression. I already told my friends I was going to win the auction for that sports car, he complained. But when it was time to pay, the account was empty. He clenched his jaw dramatically. They all laughed at me. Rebecca immediately softened. She gently rubbed his shoulder before turning toward me, her eyes filled with contempt. You've only just learned who I really am, and you're already wasting money to satisfy your pride? She scoffed. Ethan, you're unbelievably vain. Her words stirred a memory I had tried so hard to forget. Years ago, when we were supposedly struggling to survive, we couldn't even afford cold medicine. I endured the fever because I didn't want to burden her. The infection worsened until I collapsed onto the floor, shivering uncontrollably in agony. Rebecca had hugged me tightly that entire night. She cried harder than I did. If I could trade my life for yours, she'd whispered through her tears, I'd do it without hesitation. Back then, I believed every word. Now, I realized something far crueler. She would rather watch me suffer to death than spend a single dollar saving me. I said nothing about the cemetery plot. Some things no longer needed explaining. Rebecca looked me up and down before letting out a mocking laugh. An animal will always be an animal. She folded her arms. You spent 5 years locked inside a cage, and the first thing you do after getting out is waste money. Without another glance, she linked arms with Mason and walked away. I watched their figures disappear into the distance. Only then did I quietly turn around. I had barely taken a few steps when a rough cloth bag was thrown over my head. Someone grabbed my arms. Before I could struggle, I was dragged into a vehicle. Darkness swallowed everything. When consciousness slowly returned, icy air brushed against my skin. I opened my eyes. For one horrifying second, I couldn't understand why everyone was staring. Then I realized I was completely naked. I was lying in the middle of one of the busiest shopping malls in the city. My blood instantly turned to ice. The crowds gathered from every direction. Some pointed, others laughed openly. So disgusting. How can someone like him still be alive? What a pathetic excuse for a human being. He should just die. I wouldn't take him even if someone paid me. Every word pierced deeper than a knife. Someone spat directly onto my face. Another person threw an empty bottle that struck my shoulder. Soon crumpled paper, food wrappers, and trash rained down around me. No one offered to help. No one looked away. They simply watched. The humiliation felt endless. By the time someone finally removed the restraints binding me, my soul felt emptier than my body. I forced myself to stand. Step by painful step, I dragged myself home. The moment I walked inside, I saw Mason relaxing comfortably on the living room sofa. A crystal wine glass rested in his hand as he slowly swirled the deep red liquid. Seeing me, he smiled brightly. Oh, you're back. He casually tossed a set of keys into the air. Look what I bought. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a brand new sports car gleamed beneath the afternoon sunlight. $200,000. He grinned proudly. Pretty cool, isn't it? $200,000. Exactly the amount rich gamblers usually wagered every time I entered the fighting arena. Every punch, every broken bone, every drop of blood, all of it had been worth exactly one luxury car. Something inside me finally snapped. I stormed toward him and grabbed his collar. What have I ever done to you? My voice cracked with rage. Why are you doing this to me? Before I could say another word, something heavy smashed into the side of my head. A designer leather handbag. Pain exploded across my skull. Rebecca stood behind me, glaring furiously. How dare you touch him, Ethan? Her voice echoed through the room. I haven't even finished questioning you about the missing money, and you're already attacking Mason? She pointed toward him. Apologize. Now. Before I could react, 2 bodyguards kicked the backs of my knees. My legs buckled. They slammed me onto the marble floor and forced my forehead down with crushing force. Crack. Warm blood immediately trickled across my face. The room spun violently. Rebecca didn't even spare me another glance. Instead, she calmly wrapped an arm around Mason's shoulder. Come on. We're going upstairs. The two of them disappeared, laughing softly together. A housekeeper soon approached with a mop. She frowned the moment she noticed the blood spreading across the floor. What rotten luck. She sighed with annoyance. I'm the one who has to clean this filthy mess. She muttered under her breath before carelessly wiping around my body as though I were another stain on the floor. I wanted to speak. I wanted to move, but darkness slowly swallowed me. Just before I completely lost consciousness, I thought I heard someone calling my name. Ethan. The voice sounded anxious, almost frightened. It sounded like Rebecca. Maybe it was only another dream. When I opened my eyes again, the sterile smell of disinfectant filled my nose. I was lying in bed. Rebecca stood beside the window holding a medical report. For one brief moment, Hope flickered inside me. Had she seen the diagnosis? Had she finally learned the truth? Without looking at me, she spoke coldly. The doctor said you should rest for the next couple of days. There wasn't the slightest trace of concern in her voice. My heart sank. Then she finally looked at me. A mocking smile slowly spread across her face. So, are you done pretending? She tossed the medical report onto the bedside table. Coughing up blood wasn't enough, so now you're pretending to have a terminal illness? Her eyes were filled with contempt. After surviving 5 years in the underground fighting ring, you've learned absolutely nothing. She crossed her arms. All you've learned is how to use these disgusting little tricks to fool people. I stared at her in silence. After a long moment, I lowered my eyes and forced a bitter smile onto my lips. Of course, I'd almost forgotten. The Rebecca who once cried over a scratch on my hand no longer existed. The woman standing before me now would rather watch me die than believe a single word I said. Just then, the hospital room door swung open. Mason walked in carrying an innocent smile that almost looked convincing. "Ethan," he said warmly, "I know you've been upset ever since Rebecca bought me that sports car." He sighed dramatically. "I heard snake venom can sometimes be used in treatment, so I asked someone to catch the best snakes they could find for you." Rebecca immediately smiled at him, her icy expression melting into gentle admiration. "You worry too much." She looked at him with obvious affection. "You don't have to be so kind to someone like him. He made himself sick because of his own jealousy. Who else can he blame?" Mason merely smiled modestly. With a wave of his hand, several bodyguards rolled a large iron cage into the room. The sound alone made my blood run cold. Inside, dozens of venomous snakes slithered over one another, their scales scraping against the metal bars while their forked tongues flickered through the air. Instinctively, I tried to move away. Rebecca's expression immediately darkened. "Mason is only trying to help you." Her voice turned sharp. "And you're still acting ungrateful?" She glanced toward the bodyguards. "Hold him down." Before I could react, rough hands forced me back against the hospital bed. My wrists and shoulders were pinned so tightly that I couldn't move an inch. Mason calmly picked up one of the snakes with a pair of steel tongs. He smiled as though presenting a thoughtful gift. "I even learned how to handle snakes for your sake, Ethan." He slowly approached. "Let me help you." Without warning, he lowered the snake onto my arm. Its fangs pierced my flesh. A burning pain exploded through my veins. I gritted my teeth. Then Mason deliberately gasped and loosened his grip. "Oh no!" The snake slipped from the tongs. At the same time, he stumbled backward on purpose, crashing into the cage. The lock sprang open. The heavy cage toppled over. Dozens of venomous snakes spilled across my body. They wrapped around my arms, my legs, my chest. One after another, sharp fangs sank into my skin. Every bite felt like fire spreading beneath my flesh. Mason stood several steps away, calmly watching the scene unfold. A cruel smile slowly spread across his face. "Does it hurt?" He tilted his head mockingly. "But compared to what you survived in that underground fighting ring, this should be nothing." He leaned closer until only I could hear him. "Do you know something?" His smile widened. Rebecca watched everything. My pupils contracted. Every beating. Every humiliation. She watched through the surveillance cameras. He chuckled softly. Sometimes, she even chose the punishments herself. His eyes filled with contempt. "I honestly don't understand. How did a useless loser like you ever make her fall in love?" Cold sweat soaked my forehead as poison spread through my body. Every muscle screamed in agony. Even so, I refused to cry out. Seeing my silence only seemed to irritate Mason further. His face twisted with resentment. "You were beaten like an animal for 5 years. So many people tried to kill you. And somehow, you survived." His voice grew colder. "But Rebecca." He smiled proudly. "Rebecca will only ever care about me." Without warning, he grabbed another snake. Then he seized my hand and forced it toward his own arm. The snake bit him almost instantly. "Ah!" He let out a terrified scream. "Ethan." His voice trembled dramatically. "I'm sorry. Please don't make the snake bite me." The next second, Rebecca burst into the room. She immediately shoved us apart. The moment she saw the bloody puncture marks on Mason's arm, her expression froze. Before I could speak, slap. A sharp sting exploded across my face. Rebecca's palm left a burning imprint on my cheek. "Mason only wanted to help you." She glared at me, with undisguised hatred. And this is how you repay him? Do you even have a conscience? I struggled to sit upright. It wasn't me. I pointed weakly toward the overturned cage. He brought the snakes. Slap. Another loud crack echoed through the room. Before I could finish explaining, Mason suddenly slapped himself across the face. His eyes instantly filled with tears. I'm sorry, he sobbed pitifully. It was all my fault. Please. Please don't hurt me anymore. His body swayed. Then he collapsed dramatically into Rebecca's arms. Rebecca's eyes instantly turned murderous. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell her everything. But one look at her expression told me she had already decided I was guilty. Nothing I said would matter. Strip him. Her voice was colder than ice. The bodyguards obeyed immediately.